Hello, we have something very special today. This is our first guest on the podcast, and this is somebody who I've been in the interwebs with for quite some time, and I'm really excited. And so I'm going to turn it over to Keltie, and we're going to get to know more about her and all of the things that she does in the child-free community.
Hello, Maggie. Thank you for having me. What can I tell you about myself? I'm an expat like you are. I come from Canada and live in Munich, Germany. As Maggie shared, I'm child free by choice. I think this is the right podcast for that. I actually help women, though, get clear on whether or not they want to have kids because, as I'm sure we'll talk about today, my decision did not come very quickly or easily to me. It wasn't something that I always knew that I did not want to be a mom. And through my struggle and really realizing how relatively few resources there are available to help people make this choice, I've started supporting women and all kinds of different folks with getting clear on the right path for them, whatever that may be, whether it's child free, whether it's becoming a parent. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, I'm a dog mom. I love hiking. I spend a lot of time hiking in the Alps here in Germany and Austria and down in Italy. And otherwise, I'm just soaking up a beautiful life here in Europe.
Hey, welcome to Unapologetically Child Free, the Everything That You Need in One Place podcast for life without kids. I'm Maggie Dickens, a licensed therapist and your child-free hype woman, here with candid conversations about friendships, lifestyle, and everything that defines our child-free life. So join me on this journey where we get to live life unapologetically. And I have so many questions already in my head. But first, I want to talk a little bit about expat life. If you don't mind talking about your journey, your transition from Canada to Germany, I'm really interested.
Yeah. Well, I will say this is not my first time living as an expat. I actually spent about a year and a half living in Sydney, Australia in 2008 to early 2009. And so when I met my now husband in early 2009, and I found out he was from Germany, and he said to me, I'm probably only going to be in Canada for a year or so. And we had that discussion of what might our future life together look like. I was very open and receptive to spending time in Europe. I was like, yeah, let's do it. I've lived overseas before. Of course, moving to a totally foreign language country versus a Commonwealth country like Australia is a little bit different. But we actually we ended up staying in Vancouver for almost 10 years together. And in 2017, he had the opportunity with work to look at a new role in Germany. And while the timing ended up not being right for us for various reasons, it planted or replanted that seed that we'd had that at some point in the future we would live here. And so at the end of that year, we started putting plans into motion and we moved here in early 2018. So it's coming up on almost 6 years that I've been living here.
Holy bananas. That's a long time. And it's a long time to go from I'm only going to live here a year to being 10 years. So I think that speaks a lot to some flexibility and some fluidity that y'all were embracing in your life, it sounds like.
Totally. Well, and I'll tell you interestingly, when I planned to move to Australia, it was sort of an indefinite move. Like at that point in my life, I was, I guess, 25, 26. I thought, okay, you know, who knows what the future will hold, but I'll just move there and stay there. And for various reasons and family circumstances, I ended up moving back much sooner than I guess, anticipated or planned. Germany ended up being kind of the opposite, where I don't know why, but I felt a little more reluctant and unsure to move to Germany for a long period of time. So I initially said to Chris, like, maybe we go for a year or two. And he said, as I knew at that point, like, it's a big thing to move overseas. There's a lot to consider, there's a lot of bureaucracy to deal with. It takes time to get settled, to establish a new life. And he said, I think for us to make sort of an initial commitment of thinking we'll be there 2 to 3 years is probably a good thing to do. And I was like, oh my God, 2 to 3 years sounds so long. And of course, now it's been almost 6 years, and my poor mother's like, "Are you gonna stay there forever?" And the truth is, I don't know. I think I'm somebody I have trouble thinking in forever terms to a
Mhm.
degree. And maybe you're similar. We can talk about that as well. But like, I'm just open and receptive to what the future may hold, whether that's going back to Canada, whether that's maybe living in another country or city. But I'm happy. I'm enjoying my life. Things are wonderful. And so, yeah, why not stay put?
It's so wild. And yes, we can definitely talk about the forever mindset and how that shifts. I think that even plays into the child-free perspective that at least I come from, and maybe some of
Yeah.
the people that you work with. It's this idea of how am I supposed to know what I'm really going to want in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the rest of my life, when I really don't even know what I'm doing next week or like my lease was coming up on that time where you had to like say whether you're going to stay or not. And I like had almost perfectionist paralysis of just like, what's the right choice? Do I stay in this flat or do I go somewhere else? Do I stay in Lisbon? And then I just stayed because I was like, it's a great place, right?
Yeah.
And it's easier just to put in those roots. So I love that story. And I love just the flexibility of what you're talking about and leaving things fluid. As a licensed therapist, I hear so many people get stuck in the rut. I said I was going to do X. And so I have to do that. I said I was moving to Australia. So come hell or high water, I'm doing that and I'm staying there and I'm not going to let anything kind of sway me. And I think that gets us stuck in decisions that we don't really want long term.
Yeah. I call that holding yourself hostage to past choices, right?
Mm.
We've decided something and we're like, I have to do it. And we're basically beholden by this thing that past us wanted, but we change, we evolve. I would argue there's probably certain things that may stay the same for us throughout our lives, but a lot is going to shift and change, and what we want is going to potentially change. And so if we don't want that in the present moment, why are we saying, well, me 5 years ago said I was going to do it. I have to do it.
Man, me 20 years ago needed to have that conversation with somebody. And I'm
Me
wondering, are
too.
these the kind of right? Man, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but the American lifestyle is like you're supposed to you're supposed to have your life figured out by the time you're like 17 because you pick a college that's going to have the major that's going to get you the internships that's going to get ma'am, I am 17.
Yeah.
I can't make those decisions. So I'm wondering, are these the kind of conversations that you have with the people that you work with? What does that kind of sound like?
Yeah. First and foremost, the work that I do, and this doesn't just pertain to this question of do I want to have kids or not, but really, I offer what I call clarity coaching to people in different areas of their lives, in career and in business. And there's certainly themes like this that come up for a lot of us where, yeah, we previously thought life would look a certain way. Therefore, we feel like we have to stick to that script or narrative or whatever it was that we'd planned out. I think certainly we face external influences and judgments of others, specifically where it concerns this kids or child free choice, and particularly the choice to stay child free. But what I think happens is we internalize that judgment, and it's actually ourselves that we need to find compassion with and understanding for what it is we desire. Because I realized for myself with my own decision and when I was feeling really ambivalent, unsure about having kids, how much I was judging myself for not wanting them the way I was believing a woman should want to have kids. Like I was like, God, what's wrong with you? And, you're selfish and maybe there's something biologically or hormonally going on with you. Yes, those were external messages I'd internalized, but like most of the judgment, most of the reluctance, most of the feeling stuck really was something that came from myself. So with my clients, regardless of what area we're looking for clarity, it's about helping people connect with what they want in their life. Broadly speaking, I like to take sort of an outside in approach or go from what I call macro to micro. Of course, the decision not to have kids or have kids is a macro decision, but it sits within the context of our greater lives. So really looking at what's important to us. How do we want to spend our time and energy? What are our values? And then we can, of course, get into more practical aspects and we can get into, what are our expectations in terms of if we were to become a parent, what might that look like? What might the future hold? Vice versa for not having kids. And there's different areas of all this we look at, like what are our beliefs? What sort of fears are getting in the way? What's actually keeping us stuck from making this decision? A lot are these narratives we have just around decision making in general, like that there can only be one right choice.
Hmm.
That I think a lot of us believe that the best choice for us will feel good all the time, that there's not going to be any difficulty, there's not going to be any tough emotions. And we hope and think that when we make that decision, it's like we close the door and then that's that, everything's perfect. And I think for most of us, there's always going to be that wondering of like, well, what might another path have looked like? Or perhaps there's things I love about this, but then there's things that I struggle with. I think that's going to be the case no matter what we choose in life. Another thing that comes up with a lot of my clients, again, regardless of where they're looking for clarity and trying to make decisions, is that they want to say yes to everything. And intellectually, they know they can't. But I think part of what we have to contend with as humans is that there's always going to be a million paths that we won't walk. And
Yeah.
so it's about really finding as much fulfillment and joy and peace and presence with what we've chosen.
Mhm.
And I don't even think we can capture how many possible paths there are. We won't walk in life. But if we really think about it, like, yeah, we will feel paralyzed and unable to decide.
Yeah, that's such a powerful message because we do get so focused on sometimes it's being like the A or B. These are
Mhm.
my options. Yes, no, go, stay. Instead of it being like that movie, The Butterfly Effect, and how there's just so many of those micro decisions, as you were talking about, that are going to influence in so many ways that we can't even fathom. Right.
Yeah.
And you were talking about values work, and so I wanna kinda nugget that away and come back to it because that is, like that's my heart. As a therapist, as somebody who works with the child-free, helping them find friendships, values work is so important. But I do wanna touch back on, you had said that your journey to being child-free was not necessarily this immediately clarity-filled experience, and so I'm wondering what your journey was like.
As I've learned over these last few years, this is the experience actually for a lot of people, but we don't talk about it. And that is, we maybe had this assumption that we would have a child or children, specifically as a heterosexual woman raised in a traditional, nuclear household, mom, dad, few kids. That was what I saw modeled. That was what I saw in the media. That was my belief of like, that's just what you do.
Mhm,
And I always felt like it was a decision, or maybe not even a decision, but something I would do later. And so my husband and I met, I had just turned 27. Of course, at that point, some people I knew were starting to have kids, but it was generally a decision that was still a little ways off. And so we would talk about it in kind of broad terms, like, oh, when we have kids or in the future, but it always felt like something that was in the future. It was a little ways away. And
mm,
I, in particular, much more than my husband, started to really stress about it. Like it was such a present topic in my mind where I thought, okay, with each passing year, okay, I'm going to say late 20s, it was less of a concern. But as I hit my early 30s, I had this message in my head, which, there is some truth here, certainly, but like 35 is like this fertility drop off. And I'm thinking,
mm,
okay, if I don't know now, will I know then?
mhm.
I should decide, in the next 6 months, 12 months, whatever it may be. And I got so stressed out that eventually I just was like, okay, I'm going to just wait until I'm 35 and like just take some pressure off for the next few years. And again, Chris and I were talking about it, but like kind of in abstract terms. It wasn't really on our agenda. Every time I thought about having kids, it felt like it was something I like wanted to put off as long as possible. Like it was like, oh, not this year. I want to do this trip or do this pursuit. I don't necessarily want to be pregnant and then have a child. And it felt like something that I kept wanting to delay, which I think there was something very telling in that. And
Mhm.
certainly I hear from a lot of people who have become parents, like this notion of there is not necessarily a perfect timing, although I would argue there's probably timing that's better than not in certain circumstances.
For
But
sure.
yeah, I just like kind of kept pushing it back. And so fast forward to 35 and interesting, I think part of the reason we moved to Germany when we did is we saw at that point a lot of our friends around us having had one or more children, and we saw how drastically their lives had changed. And they were still people we had close friendships with and we spent time with. But within this, I remember we came back from a trip. I think we'd been in Bali and we came back, and not one, but two different groups of friends told us they were leaving our neighborhood and moving to the suburbs effectively, like, 30 to 60 minutes outside of Vancouver. And Chris and I were like, oh my God, our life is like melting in front of us.
Yes.
And I think I suppose I still sort of thought we would have kids at this point because I guess when I moved here, I would have been, yeah, about 35, 36. But it was this feeling of we can watch the world around us change. We can watch all these people embrace sort of a dynamic life, if that makes sense. And the life we were living was by no means boring. We're hiking, we're going out to the craft brewery, we've got friends, we've traveled, but it felt a little bit static, if that makes sense. And it was sort of
Mhm.
like we were standing still and everything around us was changing. And it's like, how can we actually take initiative to enact change in our own life
Mhm.
rather than feeling like we're the victims of it? And so that certainly played a role in the timing of the decision to move to Germany. And then, of course, moving here, I wasn't getting clear. I still didn't know what I want. It's like 36, 37. And at that point, I started working with a life coach. We had a few sessions together. I was like digging more into the topic. I'm really doing a lot of soul searching. And what I think I saw was the parallels in the work I had done to get clear on professional changes for myself. And then the work I was doing to help people with that really held a lot of parallels to what I needed to be doing and what I ultimately did to get clear on not wanting kids. That
Mhm.
process was very similar. I would say it's probably been about 3.5 years now that I feel like, okay, we're not doing this. And I mean, we can talk about, obviously, I have a partner. There's like another part of this decision, but
Sure.
he very much had said, this is something you need to decide for yourself because ultimately this is also your life. And it, bless him, like I'm grateful for it, but I was also kind of like, F you, because I felt like this is so hard to do. So
Yeah.
yeah. And then even then coming to a decision, I was like 95% sure I don't want to have kids. I'm 98% sure, but it has, and in some ways has continued to be, although I've made a lot of peace with that decision, but it's hard to feel like it to speak in absolutes. It's just not the person I am.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Chris
Hmm.
and I have said this on podcasts in the past, but like we have a beautiful relationship. I wish nothing more than to spend the rest of my days with this wonderful man. But we're very pragmatic. We're like, maybe it won't work out. Maybe we'll decide to go certain different ways in the future. And like that's just who I am.
Sure.
So yeah, it's been a journey. And I guess just to sort of like summarize that, when I started talking about this ambivalence, this uncertainty, this not knowing, and I actually had a wonderful conversation with Zoe Noble on her We Are Child Free podcast. People can listen if they're curious to hear more about the ins and outs of that. I had this outpouring of support from people who were like, oh my gosh, your story is my story. I've never heard anybody talking about this ambivalence before, this not knowing, this indecision. You echo so much of what I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this
Mm-hmm.
not speaking in absolutes. Like, I'm like, yeah, part of me probably would like the experience of being a mother. There's a lot that puts me off about mothering and children, but like,
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the extremes we see in the child-free space was very off-putting for me. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it was so wonderful. And I have to tell you that episode aired 2 years ago this month, and I still have people reaching out to me telling me what an impact that had. So
Oh,
it,
wow.
it was a signal to me like I needed to be doing this work. I needed to be supporting other people with this.
Yes. I mean, you are pitting on the fact that there is a rainbow in of life between the black and white, and that yes and no that we think of is so much more nuanced. And I've talked to you before about, and for those of you who've ever reached out to me about the kind of work that Keltie does, I've sent you her way because I'm on that other side of the continuum of I
Mhm.
knew I didn't want to have kids. I attempted to talk myself into it at one point with a previous relationship, but I wasn't even serious. I mean, I think I got like 10% in.
Mhm.
And so I'm that other side of that continuum of I can't even fathom from a personal experience. I have that psychology background. I have the ability to really kind of empathize with almost anything. But that idea of just being able to feel confident enough to tell your friends and family, confident enough to make those decisions of, yes, I'm going to move here or I'm going to choose this relationship or choose this job because I know kids aren't in the cards, that came easy for me. I never even think about them. I honestly rarely think of parents or kids at all. That's really, I
Mhm.
think, more of an exception than the norm. And there are a lot more people like me who are loud in the child free community versus those that are like, I don't know. I mean, I didn't even know it was a choice until a year ago. I didn't even know it was a
Yeah.
choice until 2 weeks ago or something like that. And now they're in that exploration phase and
Yeah.
space in their life, which is incredible to have that.
It is in hindsight, but at the time it's very it's very challenging. You know, it's this is a beautiful opportunity for those of us who are ambivalent and unsure. And when I say that, it's kind of like I'm sure people are like, yeah, beautiful, you know, pure. It's like
Hmm.
I'm super grateful because it's allowed me to get a lot of clarity in my life as a whole. But
Yeah.
man, it is so tough to go through. And I just want to say for anyone listening, like you are not alone if you feel this way. It is super lonely feeling like you're the only one, but I really promise that you're not. I speak with people every single day who feel the way that you do.
Yeah.
If this is your reality listening. So
Yeah. That's the thing I love about the child-free community in general is with my story and my original child-free community, it was child-free at the moment because we didn't even know this was back in 2012. So we didn't even know the lines that we fit into. So there were empty nesters, there were pre-parents. That's a new term for me.
I didn't
Um,
know it.
it's I've heard someone say it and I was like, "That's so great," because it's people who want to have children and
Mm,
who are just, they're on birth control and they're actively not in the trying stage, etcetera, but they want to be parents. So we had some pre-parents, we had empty nesters, we had people who were actively going through fertility treatments, but we all kind of got together and then we found our little niches inside of it. And I remember a really good friend of mine, she had suffered a loss. and
Mhm.
found this community online. And she said exactly what you just said is, I thought I was the only person. Because after her loss, she was like, do I even want this? Do I
Yeah.
even want to go through this? It was a pretty heavy medical trauma for her.
Mhm.
And finding a community that said, there is another option. You have an option versus continuing to put your life at risk. And having that community, I think to me just settles my cortisol levels. It gives me that oxytocin. It gives me all of those. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, oxytocin is the cuddle hormone. It makes you feel connected. And I think we need that. It's hard. And it
Yeah.
speaks to something you had said just a few minutes ago about you and your partner feeling as if you were standing still and the world was happening around you. And this is something I talk to a lot of people about in the child-free community is we kind of stop. We stop growing and progressing because if we do that as child-free people, then it feels as if we're pushing away the life we had before
Mhm.
because our friends and our family are having children and they're being very child-centered and child-focused, and we're not. And sometimes we have to say, I'm done just waiting for my friends'
Yeah.
kids to grow up, or I'm done waiting for my friends to have time or have the finances for a babysitter so we can hang out. Instead, I want to live my life, whatever that looks like, whether it leads to
Yeah.
having children in the future or it doesn't. I just am not a fan of standing still. The world is too short. Our life is too short, I should say.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you. And I think, first of all, I want to say if your life right now as a child free person or somebody considering staying child free feels good and you don't want a darn thing to change, like amazing, embrace it. Like I am definitely a big proponent of like we can have total simplicity. We can nothing, we don't need to go do and explore great things. You don't have to move overseas like Maggie and I did if you don't want to. However, I do think there's a real lack of imagination that exists within all of us or most of us, specifically those who are considering staying on this child-free path
Mm,
of, okay, if I don't have kids, what the hell else am I supposed to do? Like, what else is available to me? And I would suggest allow that question to spark excitement rather than despair or like, okay, well, is this the end of the line? Because I
mhm,
do see people who are leaning towards having kids because it offers the something to do. They don't have to figure it out themselves. They know how the next, call it 20 years of their life is going to look
mhm.
and so on and so forth. And for me, I'm like, it's so exciting. What's the rest of your life going to look like? Whatever you want it to.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
It is amazing, and it's such a great point because, again, on that continuum of there's one side in the child-free community that's louder. That's how I think about it. It's the
Yeah.
things that go viral, which is at the time of us recording this, child-free math is a big thing, and we're talking about that extra $15,000 that we're supposed to have additional every year by not having kids. I actually just did a podcast about this as well, where there can be this like, wait a second, I'm still paycheck to paycheck. I'm not swimming in extra cash. I'm not swimming in the ability to become an expat and or travel 3, 4 times a year. And that's okay.
Mhm.
Not having kids isn't going to just magically leave the world into rainbows and butterflies and everything so easy and so simple and happy and I don't know, like a Teletubby commercial or, like it's it's so much more, it's just life without kids. It's
Yeah.
the life that you wanna have, the life that you're leading without kids, and that can be something that is you and a bunch of animals on a farm in the middle of nowhere, or you and several partners living in the big city or somewhere in between, right? Or both, depending on what you choose to do throughout your life. For me, and I think this is probably because I've been child free my whole life or as long as I can remember. I see there's so many options in the child free experience that I otherwise wouldn't have noticed or been aware of if I had become a parent.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's more options that I'm not aware of. It just isn't in that forefront of my brain. And I think I would have had a lot of difficulty finding options, right? Like you were saying, there's a million different ways we can live our life. I don't think I ever thought about it that way when I thought about being a parent. That time I tried to convince myself, it was this is what it's going to look like. This
Yeah.
is what you're signing up for. There's this one track.
Yeah. It sounds sad to say in a sense, because this is, of course, just my experience. I know this isn't the experience for people who choose to become parents, but it almost felt like the end of life. Like it was like, okay, now I see what's going to happen. And of course, that's not true. There's so many
Right.
variables with having a child or children, and who will those people be, and where can life
Yeah.
take you? And
Yeah.
life can certainly be adventurous, and you can live this sort of like international lifestyle if you want with kids, 100%. And I also think there's a lack of imagination in terms of how we look at parenting and what that
Absolutely.
life can look like. But now that I've made this choice to stay child free, I feel like I can go live like a bunch of different lifetimes in this one that I have. It's super exciting.
Yeah, we do get to live a bunch of different lifestyles. I don't know what your experience in Germany has been. For me in Portugal, and I'm very fresh here, the people that I'm meeting are child-free. The people that I'm surrounding myself with, it doesn't mean that there aren't families who aren't moving here. There are. I see them in the forums and I see it happening, but there's such a larger grouping, if you will, of child-free people where it's so nice to not even have to have the question of, am I actually gonna be able to spend time with this person because I'm surrounding myself with child-free people, which is possible.
Yeah, I think it's probably, certainly I know a lot of expat parents here in Munich, but I think even those parents and what I hear from them is like the way they're doing things, the way they're raising their kids, the way they spend their time and energy, it looks vastly different than, let's say, and for example, I think about a number of American parents I know here in Munich. They feel like they can't really relate to the path that their parent friends have followed back in the States because
Mm.
there is more adventure, there is more travel. And, of course, this is a privilege. It's not one afforded by everyone, but it's just life looks a little bit more interesting, diverse. There's different kinds of experiences that happen when you live as an expat in a foreign city and country. So I think you look at the nature of who becomes an expat, those people naturally are questioning the way things are done. They want a different kind of life.
Mhm.
They wanna have different experiences. They wanna travel. They wanna meet new people, and that's gonna look very different than someone who, let's say, has grown up in a small city or town, who's stayed there, and that's been their life, and that's a different choice. It's equally valid. It can be equally as fulfilling, but that's not who becomes expat.
Yes, and I think that's a really great point because we've talked a lot about child-free bingos in the child-free community, and a lot of those stigmas and the questions that people who don't understand the child-free lifestyle, they're coming from that lack of creative thinking, right?
Mhm.
They're seeing the world as one thing or even two things. They're seeing child-free people as, "Oh, well, you are sad, you're lonely," right? It's this dichotomy of you're either a parent and happy or child-free and sad, and there's so much in the middle, and I really like that you talk about being, curious. I talk to people in the community a lot about our subconscious. I'm certified in clinical hypnosis, and so I talk a lot about the subconscious, and the subconscious is playful and really curious about the world, and when we open that up, our imagination is able to kind of flourish. We kinda shut it off when we become adults, and we get very pragmatic, as you were talking about
Yeah.
being, and we forget that, "Wait a second, it doesn't have to look a certain way." It's interesting. I love chatting with you and hopefully have you on another time. This has been a really fun time. What I would like to kind of transition to before I get into another digression of something else and give you the chance to just say a little bit more about the ways in which people can work with you. But I know that you've been doing a lot of things in the background. If you wouldn't mind sharing all those things that you're doing and ways that you're showing up for the child free community.
Yeah, of course. Well, certainly I'm always hosting conversations on my Instagram. I have a is that the right word? TikTok account. I'm like kind of, sort of over there. It's been fun. I enjoy doing video content, but certainly I have everything ranging from some free different resources. I have like a book guide with 22 different books you can read if you're on the fence trying to decide whether you want to have kids or stay child free. I've got some other resources that you can find on my website. But with regards to sort of offerings that I have coming down the pipe, I've been hosting a 2-hour workshop over this last year on a pretty frequent basis. It's called the Kids Are Child Free Workshop. It walks you through some of the key questions and exercises and tools that I personally use to get clear on my choice and that I've used with my one-on-one clients. And so that's a really good starting point for people who are on the fence, regardless of which way you're leaning or how, are you 90-10? Are you 50-50? That's something worth checking out. I have a couple of upcoming dates for that can be found on the website. But off the back of that, I'm actually building a kids or child free group coaching program. And that's something that I'm going to be starting in the middle of January. And I'm actually looking for 5 to 10 people who want to be part of the initial beta round at a substantially discounted rate, because I'm really looking for feedback as I build this program before I launch it in a bigger, splashier fashion in the spring. So if there's anyone listening who's on the fence, we can probably link to that in the show notes. But that's going to be a live online group program that'll be running over a few months to help you get clarity on your own right choice. And I'm also finding that I have quite a sort of subset of my audience of women who are like, they're almost sure they want to be child free. They're like 95% there. They're probably someone like myself, call it 2 years ago. And yet there are these concerns that are standing between them and greater confidence. They're wondering, to speak to the work you do, like, what's my community going to look like? How can I find those types of people who are also child free? Maybe they have fears and worries about the future. And so helping them contend with these things to really connect with not just the great parts of being child free, but maybe some of those worries they have so that we can help them get to greater confidence. That's going to be coming in January as well. Also, a 3-month group coaching program that I'm calling Confidently Child Free. Again, bringing women together with people who understand and are meeting them where they're at to help them get greater confidence, like from shaky to rock solid in their choice. So yeah, I'd love to share the details with anyone who would be interested. Like I say, I'm looking for 5 to 10 people for each of those for a mid-January start.
Oh, yes. We're going to put all the links, every way that you can possibly work with Keltie. We're going to get all of that in the show notes for you, including her contact information. And I love the from shaky to solid ground, that shaky to confident. Before I started being solely working with child-free people outside of my counseling business, I did confidence and clarity work. And it's such a powerful experience to help someone go from a thinking, amusing, and entertaining space that's full of uncertainty and fear to, yes, this is the decision that I want. And, you know, I think it's important, and you can step in at any point if I'm misspeaking, but for me as a child-free person who's known forever, sometimes it's hard for this group that I belong into in the child-free community to even entertain or hear people in the questioning phase, because it's so obvious to us for our lives. And I want to encourage anyone who is listening and going, I don't get it. It's such an easy decision. Is that I'm so happy that it's easy for some as it was for me. However, I would much rather have people really making an active choice versus making a passive choice and just going whatever feels right that day, because that's what leads to more dissatisfaction in life. And especially, this is my personal opinion, not related to anybody else, but I'd rather parents become parents because they really want to, not because they fell into it. So I'm really happy you, Keltie, you're showing up the way that you do for the community and helping people live more confident lives, because we need that.
Yeah. Thank you so
So
much for saying so. Yeah, it's an honor to be able to do this work. And again, if you're listening and you don't relate or resonate, I think it's great for us to be able to, okay, that's interesting, and to have empathy for that experience that people have, that they may feel unsure, that there may be parts of this that they grieve. I saw kind of an atrocious comment on another post the other day, another creator's post, saying, if you're grieving, you're not sure, like, why the hell didn't you just go have kids? And basically, like, you're not really child free, you're childless. And these are not the attitudes that we want. And they're certainly not the attitudes that are welcome in my own community and space. It's okay to be unsure. It's okay not to know. It's part of being human for us to have these experiences in certain areas of our life. Maggie, it may not be for you with the child free choice, but I'm sure there's other areas where you've had not knowing or ambivalence or uncertainty. So I really seek to normalize that. And I just want people to know, like, that's what we're all about. It's okay being in that middle ground.
yes, it is. And, I call those pot stirring posts or
Mhm.
comments where they get the clicks, they get
Yeah.
the eyeballs. And if that's what somebody's after, I attempted that for like a solid month. And I was like, this is not me. I can't, I
Yeah.
don't like the pot stirring, because we're here seeking community. We're here seeking a life that we can stand behind. And even talking about your story and how it was you living your life, day to day, and how children did and didn't play into that thinking pattern. We all have those. We all have those things of like, well, do I want to take this job? Do I want to continue this relationship? Do I want to buy the house or rent the house or what have you? And so much of that is getting curious, like you said, getting creative, allowing ourselves to think outside of whatever traditional box that our society put us in when we were little, and making more
Yeah,
active decisions and being more active versus passive. That's the name of the game. So much of that comes to values. We didn't get to talk about values work, but perhaps another day we can chat about that. It's, I think, its own conversation. It's such a big topic, and not a lot of people know what the heck I mean when I say, "Have you, done any values work?" And they're like, "I mean, I don't know. I value my time." So they're not very sure. So perhaps we can chat about it again. So thank you so much. I am so happy to have had this time. And, we're just going to keep doing what we can for the community and just
yeah,
enjoying our lives, right?
of course. Thank you so much, Maggie, for having me on and for everything that you're doing for the child-free community.
You're welcome. This has been great. And for those of you who want to know more about how to work with Keltie, I'll have all of that information in the show notes as well as her contact information. And if you have no idea how to access those, you can always just reach out to me and I will send it to you directly. And until next time.